Hello everyone, we continue with our series on the life of David. Today I want to start by showing you a music box that is very dear to me. It's on my nightstand and I've had it since I'm a little girl. And what's so special about it is that it has the Lord's Prayer. It plays the Lord's Prayer. And you know, the song is such a beautiful song. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. But there's a sentence in the prayer: forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Well, today we're going to study when David would be challenged by somebody that he really loves. How will he respond to that challenge? And we're going to find that he actually responds with forgiveness and humility. There is a book that I really want to recommend called A Tale of Three Kings by Gene Edwards. And it says that God allowed David to go through all the oppression with King Saul so that God could kill the Saul in David. So God used Saul to kill the Saul in David so that when David became king, he wouldn't be like Saul. And today's story shows us that he was very different than Saul when he was challenged by a young man, in this case, his son. So let's start on 2 Samuel 13. David had quite a journey with forgiveness. He had to forgive King Saul for all the oppression. He had to forgive other people. He had to forgive himself for all his failures. He had to believe that God could forgive him. And you can see you can read the beautiful Psalm 51, that prayer asking God to forgive him. But now something happens in his family. It starts on 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 1. It was after this that Absalom, the son of David, had a beautiful sister whose name was Tamar, and Amnon, the son of David, loved her. Tamar was the sister of Absalom, and they had a half-brother whose name was Amnon from a different mom. And Amnon really wanted Tamar. He was infatuated with her. And unfortunately, in this chapter, he raped her. And then he hated her after he raped her. And Absalom, the first reaction he had when he found out was, you have to keep silent about this, he said to his sister. Never keep silent about this type of injustice. If you have a child that has been raped or molested by a relative, don't ever say, well, to keep the peace, you gotta say nothing. No, your child will live with the consequence if you don't defend them. And in here, Absalom says to the sister in verse 20, come and live with me in my house and keep silent. So Absalom starts on what I call a downward spiral. When we invest in the wrong side of things, he's not asking his father to defend the sister or to stand up for it or anything like that. He is going to take matters in his own hands. So the first thing in his down spiral is be silent, which we should never do in these cases. Then 2 years go by, he creates a banquet in 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 28. He invites all the king's sons, among them Amnon, who has raped his sister. And verse 28 says that he planned to kill him. And yes, he was killed. 2 years have gone by from the silence to the killing. After he kills him, he flees. He goes far away, says verse 38. Absalom had fled and gone to Yeshur and was there 3 years. Well, Yeshur is where his grandfather was. So now he goes away. So first silent, then he kills Amnon, then he goes away to his grandfather's house. But then he comes back to Jerusalem. 2 more years go by. So this is 7 years altogether that he has not seen his father David. But when we think finally he sees his father David after 7 years, and we think it's all over, but it's not all over. After that, he starts a conspiracy against the king, and then he declares himself king. And, you know how the story ends. All downward, because he didn't want to deal with what he needed to deal with. And How is David going to answer that? You know, David is the king. He's being challenged by his son. His son wants to be king instead of David. His son starts doing all kinds of things. He starts publicly taking the harem of the king and taking the women for him. He keeps talking against the king. He sounds like he's a great leader for the people. What is David going to do when this happens? Well, David is having the opposite reinforcing loop. He has learned that he has to trust in God. And so when we go to 2 Samuel 15, on verse 30, look what David is doing. He went up the ascent of the Mount of Olives and wept as he went. We went through this place where it goes to the Mount of Olives, and we could think of David leaving Jerusalem, going out, and he was weeping, and all the people were weeping with him. So the first thing he does, he has humility and tears. But the second thing he does is 2 Samuel chapter 15, verse 25. The king said to Zadok, return the ark of God to the city, because Zadok wanted to take the ark so that the ark could go with David. And he said, no, return it. And it says, if I find favor in the sight of the Lord, then he will bring me back again and show me both it, the ark, and his habitation. But if he should say, I have no delight in you, behold, here I am. Let him do to me as he seems good to him. So not only is he humble, but he submits to the Lord. He's having the opposite progression. He is being humble, submitting himself to the Lord. Then he leaves the vindication to God. There's people that are cursing him. On chapter 16, you can read all of this. They're cursing him, and he doesn't do anything against them because he says God is going to decide the outcome on this. Well, finally, he's able to separate the person from the problem. He hates what his son is doing, but he loves his son. And perhaps the part that really touches me is when Absalom is eventually killed. The king is so sad. You would say, oh, he was happy because this man was challenging him. No, but it was his son. And look at 2 Samuel 18, verse 33. The king was deeply moved and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And thus he said as he walked, oh, my son, Absalom, my son Absalom, would I have died instead of you? Oh, Absalom, my son, my son. He loved his son so much that he hoped that he could have died instead of his son, even though his son was challenging him, was dishonoring him. You know, David was a symbol of Christ. That's why we call him a man after God's own heart. And Christ went through the same thing. We as his children rebelled against him. And he submitted his life and death to God. And he died in our place, separated the sin from the sinner, loves us. He loved us to death at the cross. And he said, oh, my child, I wish I could die in your place. And then he did die in our place. So when you find yourself challenged, we can do what David did. Remember the Lord's Prayer. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And when you're challenged, remember the cross and submit to God.